more big band figure playing. In this video, we're going to talk about multiple accents in the same measure. We're going to talk about them as section figures. We're also going to talk about them as ensemble figures. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how figures can be written differently, but we can actually interpret them in the same way. Let's get into it. Let's jump right in. In this first figure, this is probably the most common big band figure that you will see. Downbeat and the and of two. We're going to play it first as a section figure. And now we know that section figures mean that we are playing them basically within time. And a section figure means that another part of the band has a melody and we're supporting the section that is playing the accents to support that melody. So if the saxes are playing ba-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba and the trumpets go bop, bop, and add that in, we're bop, bop, one and a two. All right, so first, lightly, in time, no big deal. We're going to play everything on the snare drum. All right, so there it is. We're just playing the figure on the snare drum. It's matching what's going on in some background figure somewhere. No big deal. If you're just starting, you can play that way on the snare drum. You can also interpret this by playing quarter notes on the ride cymbal. Now this could be a technical thing if it's hard to play 1, 2, and with the ride cymbal, but also I might make a musical decision because quarter notes might make the band swing harder, or if I'm playing at a high rate of speed, sometimes playing just quarter notes, if I'm playing involved things on the snare drum or between the bass drum and snare drum, quarter notes make it easier for me to keep the time going, therefore keeping the band going, and therefore doing my job well. All right, so let's do it one more time with quarter notes all on the snare drum a little faster. An important thing to know how to do is go from playing jazz time into quarter notes. So you could literally switch, a measure or two before and then get into your quarter note time and then go back to jazz time after you play the figure. So I'm going to do this one more time just so you get a feel for it. I won't do this through the rest of the video, but I'm going to play 2 bars of jazz time, 1 bar of quarter notes leading into our figure. So it'll be a 4-bar phrase. And then you just return to jazz time whenever you can get to it. So that can happen for any of these figures. You can always do that. Now let's check out the same thing as an ensemble figure. So I'm going to play a setup that leads us into 1 and 2 and. All right, here we go. So in that case, I played a very simple fill. And 4 and 1, left, right, left, back to the cymbal. That allowed me to play the first note of that figure on the bass drum and the second note of the figure on the snare drum. I used the snare drum to set up the downbeat of 1, the first note of the figure, then I played the second one on the and of 2 on the snare drum. So I'm breaking it up between the bass drum and the snare drum now. The reason why I did that is because when we think about figures, one of the ways that we can interpret them is we can think of bass drum 1, snare drum 2, bass drum 3, snare drum 4. And a good little thing to practice is just playing bass, snare as an idea and a way to navigate the band through figures. You're not really going to do that, but if you think of things in that way, it can be quite helpful. Let's just play a little bit of that bass snare so that you get a feel for what that's like. I'm not going to play every figure that way because it would sound kind of goofy, but later in this video you'll see as we interpret more of these figures, by keeping this idea in mind, it can be very helpful in figure playing and actually swing the band like crazy. Now I'm going to put a little bit of a fill between 1 and the and of 2. So we're going to set it up and then play the fill between those 2 figures. That fill between 1 and the and of 2 is maybe the most common big band figure fill that you'll find. Starts with the bass drum on the downbeat of 1, then I bring my right hand over to play 1, 2, 3 on the snare drum. 1, 2. You can also finish that on the bass drum. Also very effective. Now remember, I'm bringing that right hand over. 1, 2. That makes it very easy for me to get back to the ride cymbal, whether I'm going to be playing the bass drum or the snare drum. Sounds great, and you'll use it a billion times in the rest of your figure playing career. Check out this next figure. A couple things are interesting about it. It's starting on 3 and ending on the and of 4, but it's the same number of notes. And it's actually the exact same thing that we just played as the fill for that last figure that was 1 and the and of 2. If we play that exact same idea starting on beat 3, we've already played that figure. So as you can see, these look differently, but you can interpret them exactly the same way. Let's first play this as a section figure, lightly, all on the snare drum. Sounds great, and it totally works. Let's turn this into an ensemble figure where I play a little bit of a setup on beat 2 leading into that figure 3 and 4 and. And I'm also going to play that and on the bass drum at the very end. When I played that snare drum on beat 2, that's kind of known as a setup note. So if there is a figure that's starting an eighth note or a quarter note later, those notes are really important to align the band to get ready for the figure. That is the setup. You can play a more complicated fill if you want to, but for the most part, even if you're just playing a couple quarter notes, I play do bop boo ba doo boo. I mean, you hear the figure coming from a mile away when you set something up very clear and very simple that way. These next two figures are written differently, but we can actually interpret them the same way. This first one is 2 dotted quarter notes and a quarter note on beat 4. And I'm going to employ some of this bass drum on 1 and then other stuff on the snare drum. So I'll play the bass drum for the first, and then the and of 2 and 4 I'm going to catch on the snare drum as a section figure initially light, kind of within my jazz time. I'm not getting crazy time all around the drums. Just playing time, setting it up, nice little thing in the background. Here we go. Now, if I wanted to do a quick little setup behind that, I could simply play the snare drum on beat 4, leading into the figure, starting on beat 1 with the bass drum. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm using a snare drum to set up the bass drum. If the figure started on the snare drum, I would try to use the bass drum to set that up. So the two sounds are very different and offset each other, aligning everybody in the band to know, hey, this figure's coming, we're getting ready to go. All right, here we go. Okay, great. So let's check this thing out as an ensemble figure. And if you'll notice, it's still 1 and the and of 2. That figure can still work. So I'm going to play the bass drum on 1, and then I'll play our setup in between, leading back to the bass drum, and then I'm going to do another pickup on the snare, and I'm going to actually crash the bass drum again on beat 4. And you'll hear how this figure goes ba-ba-doo, bee-da-bop, and I'm playing the whole figure as an ensemble. Here we go. So as you can hear, even though we've got this extra hit on beat 4, the first half is something that's very familiar to us. So as you're looking at different figures, that's 3 different ways that this same figure has been written, and we're playing it the exact same way. So it's very helpful to have that information. Take a look at this next one here. Again, it's written a little bit differently, but we can actually play it exactly the same. Now, there could be articulations or times when you have to be really careful about that. So with that 8th note on the and of 2 there, it may be better for us to play it that way, but on the snare drum as a shorter sound, but you could play it this exact same way that we just played this one. I'll do this one a little bit differently as a section figure where I'm playing everything on the snare drum except for the first note again. And as you could clearly hear, I was playing it as a section figure, but I was using the snare drum to set up the bass drum figure starting on beat 1. Let's play this as an ensemble figure. Now, we already talked about before, I could play it the exact same way that I played that last one, like this. But let's say we don't want all those bass drums going there. So I'm going to use our different sticking for that 1 and the and of 2. and then I'll play a bass drum to set up the snare drum on beat 4. So if everything had to be high and I was playing with the trumpets or something, I could basically do everything on the snare drum just like that. We're timbre matching a lot of the times. High notes, trumpets, snare drum, trombones, low notes, bass drum. These things don't always work. Bass, snare, high notes, low. Things can get kind of messy. So you really have to use your ears and also look around. If someone's giving you a dirty look, maybe try a different way of doing it. If everyone's smiling and going like this, keep doing it that way. These are really just ways that I found that work for me, and they're by no means the only way to interpret these big band figures. As you go on and try different things, you're going to find things that work for you and things that don't work for you. So, keep in mind, if you're just getting started, these are some good things to be thinking about, but as you go on, we just can't cover every possible way to deal with that stuff here. So as you go on with your playing and training and studying and all that stuff, you'll find new ways. Oh, I can play this figure like this. I can play this figure like that. I can navigate this section like this. Because there's only so many figures, and you're going to see these things over and over again. So, at first it seems kind of awkward. How do I do this? But like any language, these things become more familiar the more you do it. All right, let's check out this next figure. You've got the and of 1 and then 3, 4. So this is a classic place where I might play the snare drum on the and of 1 and then play boom, crack, bass drum on 3, snare drum on 4. Going back to our bass, snare concept of doing that. You don't always have to do it that way, and there may be better ways, but I like this. So I'm going to play this as a section figure very lightly using that format. So as you may have noticed, I played the bass drum on 1 to set up the snare drum on the and of 1, and then I played 3, 4. So the only thing that's different between boom, crack, is a snare drum on the and of 1. Makes the figure sound nice, makes the figure sound super clean. Now you could play it all on the snare drum, and it would sound like this. That also works. So depending on the situation you're in, that actually may sound better. And the situation could be, wow, I'm really new to playing this and I just want to play everything on the snare drum because I'm just getting it going. Or it could be, I just want everything to be light with a saxophone section, and so that's how I'm going to interpret that figure. Let's think of this as an ensemble figure. So I'm just going to play the whole thing a little bit bigger. We know that the primary setup note is on beat 1. So I'm just going to add our very simple and 4 and 1 leading into that, and then play the figure. And I'm just going to play it a little bit bigger, and bam, there you go. We're playing as an ensemble. Depending on where you are in the chart and what's happening, the fills can get bigger. You can play a bigger deal, you can get around on the toms or play a bigger fill to set up that primary note on the downbeat. The main thing is know where your landing point is. I gotta go boo-dot no matter what I do. So if I go boo-dot, I just have to make sure I nail that. So let's try something a little bit more crazy town. Or you could try a little quarter note triplet kind of thing like this. I was also playing a little fill-in note on the snare drum going into the downbeat of 3. So I ended up interpreting the figure from the downbeat of 1 like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Again, through 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just keeps everybody aligned and fills the space in nicely when you need it. And this last one is another classic boom, crack, boom, crack. You can play it all on the snare drum as a section figure like this. So as you could hear, I did that a little bit with jazz time and also just with quarter notes. If you have a more involved figure like that, sometimes playing quarter notes is a little bit easier, and sometimes it swings the band a little harder. Sometimes it doesn't swing the band a little harder. You just sort of have to try it. Definitely at upper tempos, I'm leaning more toward quarter notes when I have a figure like that. I'm trying to catch it all on the snare drum. Just something to think about. Okay, let's get right into this thing as an ensemble figure. We're going to play boom, crack, boo, dot, dot. Bass, snare, snare. We're going to play a very simple hit on the snare drum on beat 4 to set the whole thing up, and then we're really just playing boom, crack, really simple, and trust me, it'll swing the band like crazy. That's certainly not the only way to play this. If I want to play do-dat, bow, I could put a crash at the very end. So if it's a short note, I could play those last two on the snare drum. If it's do-dat, dow, I could put a crash over here with the bass drum on the end, and it would sound like this. You could also get off of time and play do-ga-ba-ba-bam and play that 3 and as a tom and snare hit and then hit the crash. And I'm kind of flamming those notes to make it thick sounding, you know. At a slower tempo, it sounds good too, like this. Check it out. Just be very mindful at those slower tempos, you know. I'm usually keeping and depending on what's going on with the big band, sometimes I like to try to lay that stuff back a little bit. Just makes the whole thing sound a little fatter, a little thicker. Also keep in mind that we're trying to keep the band lined up, you know. Horns, by the time the air comes out of their horn, things are already slowing down. So our job is to not only navigate them through these figures, but really be strong with the time for them so that no matter what's going on with them, the tempo of the band is staying where it needs to. Well, that's a lot of information to process with just a few figures. I hope you have some good insight into how I think about this stuff so that when you see figures on a page, you can sort out what's going on for yourself. It takes some practice. You got to stay with it, but I know you can do it. All right, see you next time.